he was with a colleague. The talk is on working with domestic violence and specifically head injury, as many of these women tend to get. And I thought it was really interesting. I know some of us out here do work with you know, various populations, and it would not be uncommon to have somebody walk into your office who was in a bad marriage. I'm actually working with somebody right now who was in the process of divorce, was abused psychologically, but not physically. But Josh saw these folks, and they presented with interesting histories and lots of head injury, and I thought that would be of interest to you folks here with New Mind to See. So Josh, without any further introduction, I'm going to turn this over to you, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Rob. Thank you, Dr. Suter, for having me. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me. We're going to talk today about some of the work that I'm undertaking. During this presentation, I'm pretty informal, so during this presentation, if you have questions or things, feel free to chime in, or you can wait till the end. I'll give you my email address as well toward the end, so you feel free to send me any questions. My name is Josh Brown. I run a program for domestic and sexual violence-related brain injury at the Fort Bend Women's Center. That's in Fort Bend County, which is just outside of Houston, Texas. So today I wanted to kind of share a few things about just a brief overview of domestic violence, brief overview of brain injuries, and as well as kind of explore our program, some of the results we're seeing, some of the issues that we've run up against while building the program, things like that. Just to give you a little background on us, on the Fort Bend Women's Center, we are a domestic violence agency serving Fort Bend County, surrounding counties. We even see clients who come in from different states. As you can see here, our mission assisting survivors of domestic and sexual violence and their children. We're all about safety and self-sufficiency. We talk about women, but we do have male clients as well. So just kind of keep that in mind as we go along. Just to give you some kind of background on what we do, to give you an idea of the services we provide. We have a 24-hour crisis hotline. We operate an emergency shelter for those fleeing domestic and sexual violence. I actually office out of our shelter. We offer non-residential services, which are all of the services we offer to folks in the shelter, but folks that don't need shelter. We offer a vaccination program. We have a nurse on site who does free vaccinations for the children here. Obviously, the neurofeedback training we offer. Full range of mental health, traditional mental health counseling, legal, vocational, medical assistance, and then we have both short and long-term housing programs that we assist with. So before we kind of get into everything, I just wanted to, some of you may be familiar with domestic violence. I just wanted to give a very, very brief overview of domestic violence. You may hear different names for domestic violence, things like battering, intimate partner violence. That term actually is a term that you start to hear more often. Both sexual and physical violence are sort of lumped into that term. Teen dating violence, spousal abuse, family violence. If you're working in the mental health field, you've no doubt run up against these things, whether primarily or secondarily. So all of that it goes into a pattern of coercive controls. So we're talking about control from one partner to that exercises over another. And these can be folks that are married. They can be people who are living together, have an ongoing or even a prior intimate relationship, can be considered domestic violence. And you may have seen these terms. Of course, you've probably dealt with clients with physical and emotional, verbal violence and abuse, psychological. You can get sexual and even spiritual abuse as well. And we see that across the board here at Fort Bend Women's Center. So before we get to the program, let's talk about traumatic brain injury. So I just want to give you just a brief definition. The Mayo Clinic defines a traumatic brain injury occurring when an external mechanical force causes brain dysfunction. And the key term there is external mechanical force. So this one I like more, this sort of definition. This is the extremely scientific definition. And I always try to get through this in one breath. So I'll try it today. Let me take a breath and see. Traumatic brain injury is a non-degenerative, non-congenital insult to the brain from an external mechanical force, possibly leading to permanent or temporary impairment of cognitive, physical, and psychosocial functions with an associated diminished or altered state of consciousness. Whew, that's a big one, a lot of big words, but basically you go back to external mechanical force. So I sort of prefer the simplified definition. So just to give you an idea of the overlap, and we'll talk a little bit more about this with the domestic violence population, but what we see is victims of intimate partner violence are at a much higher risk of acquiring a traumatic brain injury. Sort of makes sense if you think about it, if they're victims of domestic, of physical violence particularly. Conversely, those with TBIs are at higher risk of becoming abused. So we see sort of chicken or egg sort of thing situation in that scenario. So there's not a lot of studies done on the overlap of domestic violence and traumatic brain injury as of yet. There are a few. For instance, in the first study there, you could see 30 to 74% of victims of domestic violence have TBI present. Well, if you work in research or statistics, or you just kind of know numbers, 30 to 74% is a huge range. So it doesn't really tell us exactly the prevalence of domestic violence, and it could be regional. We don't know. There's just not enough research out there. But we do know that the large majority of physical domestic violence incidents involve the head or neck. And when they involve the head or neck, you would then extrapolate that you would be more likely to see brain injuries. Just give you an idea of the difference, and we see this at Fort Bend. In one study showed that 74% of women in shelters sustained some type of brain injury from their partner, whereas only 27% sustained accident-related injuries. We see, obviously, head injuries due to violence here, but we also see a pretty high incidence of head injuries due to accidents, particularly car accidents here as well. And we'll get into where we train in the head and that sort of thing, and why I think we see that in just a moment. So let's talk about our program. So it took a little while to get this thing started. We're going along pretty smoothly now. We're still early on in the process, but I wanted to kind of give you an idea of what how we came to be, what our life cycle was. So we really started out early. Years before we got started, the agency started to notice there were a subset of clients who, even through all the traditional therapy and employment services, et cetera, just weren't progressing, and they couldn't figure out why. So they started to look into that, and they found that maybe it's undiagnosed brain injury. So then they started looking at the research, the overlap of DV and brain injury, and they found that, yes, there is research coming out that shows that. So they began screening for it. And we'll talk about what screening we use here shortly, kind of a little bit in depth. But they started screening for brain injury and found that, yes, in fact, there was a high incidence of potential brain injury in this population. So now what do? So the agency started looking at program model development. This is sort of where I came in. They started looking at what do? They came across neurofeedback. This is an interesting thing that's showing promising results. Let's see if we can do something here. So we went about securing funding, which is not easy at all. And I'll talk about where we're funded. It took probably a good year and a half to fully secure funding. And then the staff training and recruitment piece was another big one, because as most of you know who are on the webinar, I assume, learning neurofeedback, there can be a steep learning curve. So getting everyone trained, especially on a large scale, can be quite a chore. And then right now we're kind of in the data collection stage, but we had to figure out what data do we collect, how do we collect it, how do we keep records that we know of, and I'd love to be corrected. I haven't heard of it yet, and I'd love to know if there is. But I think we're the only one so far that I've run across a program in a domestic violence agency that does it on this scale. So we didn't have really anything to necessarily fall back on for as what to look at and how to screen. So we had to kind of come up with that as we went. And then obviously with any program, there's ongoing problem solving, identifying your limitations, et cetera, and we still day to day do that. So let's drill down a little bit more into those. When we started the program, we came at it with a couple of three different sort of categories of program goals. Our first was short term. So the question was, can we reduce the amount of negative symptoms you're seeing, and we'll talk about our screenings our assessments we use, but can we reduce those negative symptoms? Can neurofeedback do that in this population? That was question number one. And as you'll see as we go, we found that yes, we can. Our intermediate goals were a little bit more difficult to initially assess, but we wanted to know, can our clients that go through neurofeedback and finish, can they obtain and maintain employment, education, job skills, things like that? Because one of the big barriers with this population is to self-sufficiency is employment, obtaining and maintaining employment. And we have job readiness training and the whole deal, but if they are traumatized with a brain injury, with mental illness, it can be very difficult to obtain and maintain employment. And we saw that sort of that revolving door of employment. So can we help them maintain that? And then reduce staff time per client. If you're clinicians, which I assume most of you are, as you work with clients, you know there are certain clients who monopolize way more time than they should. It may not be productive time, and we see that quite a bit here in the agency. So trying to see if we can get clients, again, more self-sufficient, so they don't require as much time from our case managers, from our clinicians, et cetera. And then finally, we looked at long-term goals, and we're not nearly there yet, but we're working toward this, is to actually increase our agency service capacity. Can we serve more clients? Can we reduce the need for long-term housing? Our long-term housing, as you can imagine, is expensive. We have housing and urban development grants that we get to help house some of our clients long-term who have mental illness and disabilities. Can we intervene early so that we can reallocate that money to more services, more clients? So those were our goals. That's what we were looking toward. So when we started the program, our initial round of funding came from the Texas Health and Human Services Commission. We got some funding from the George Foundation to buy all of our equipment, and I'll talk about what equipment we use shortly. The George Foundation is a large local Fort Bend County-based foundation that we worked with in the past, and then we got money from the Simmons Foundation. So initially, we looked at targeting 18 total clients. Now, since then, we've had many, many more that have come through the program, but initially it was 18 total clients, and out of that 18, we had 14 what we consider completers. And completers are those who, and we'll talk about the process, are those who went through the entire pre-assessment process, finished all of their neurofeedback sessions, and went through all of their post-assessment process, which is a pretty intensive sort of regimen of things to do. All adult clients, both women and men, we had no men who finished. They started but didn't finish. All of our completers have been women. They have to be positive on the HELP screening tool for traumatic brain injury, which we'll get in depth with in a minute. We began with our long-term housing residents because those were folks that had major mental health diagnoses. They were our more severe clients. And we've since moved into not only long-term housing, but shelter and non-residential as well. All of our agency counselors, really all but just a couple of our agency counselors are involved in neurofeedback. We've recruited them into the program. They're all either board certified in neurofeedback or they're working toward board certification currently. And again, we have 3 clinics that we operate. So we look at a multitude of assessments in the beginning of the process. We look at that HELP screening for traumatic brain injury. We look at the World Health Organization Disability Assessment Schedule, otherwise known as the HUDAS, which is one of my favorite. My wife's from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, so they always say HUDAT, and so that always reminds me of that. But the HUDAS looks at overall disability, and so we look at that. We also look at a range of DSM-5 assessments for things like depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress. The reason we use these is real simple. They're free. They're free to use. There's no licensing involved. As a nonprofit, again, we had to kind of make this up as we went along. So as a nonprofit, we have to watch budget. And so we came across these. Some of our counselors came across these, and that's what we use. And we've been pretty pleased with how they've been used and how easy they are to use. We also videotape our interviews with our pre-interview and our post-interview with our clients. Obviously, we get their permission to do so. If they don't give us permission, written permission, then we don't videotape them. We like to videotape them to see the changes in things like grooming and affect and eye contact and the way they're enunciating things, and hopefully you'll be able to meet one of our clients a little bit later in the presentation, pre and post, and hopefully the audio works so you can kind of hear it and see it. But it's been really an amazing contrast between pre and post. And then of course we use quantitative EEG database comparison. So this is all QEEG based work that we do. So let's drill down for just a second into the HELPS screening tool. Just to give you an idea, this can be used by anybody. It's a brief tool, and it's supposed to be for people who are not TBI experts. So when clients come into our agency at large initially, our case managers do a large intake, and this has become part of that intake process where they'll do the HELP screen. If they are screened as positive, then they're referred into our program, and we've actually since expanded it out even to participants in our program who are not positive on the HELPS, even though the vast majority are anyway. HELPS is an acronym. It asks questions about being hit in the head, emergency room treatment, loss of consciousness, problems, and sicknesses. So I'll show you here. Here's an example. So this, I've obviously cut off the top section of the identifying information, but the HELP screen can come in many forms. This is just the form we use. So as you can see up top, it asks questions about, did you ever hit your head? Were you hit in the head or your face? And you answer yes or no. If you answer no to all of the H section, you're done. You don't test positive. That's it. If you answer at least one yes to H, it moves on down, asks about emergency room, losing consciousness, problems, and sicknesses. And as you can see, with this particular problem, this particular person, they were hit quite a bit, shaken, strangled. They lost consciousness, had many, many problems and sicknesses after. So this was a pretty ideal candidate for our program. But this, again, this is free to use. You can just, all you have to do is search it online, and you may see different formats, how it's set up, but this is something that we use agency-wide, even if they don't come into the neurofeedback program. So when they initially screened the ladies with the HELP screen for traumatic brain injury, we took a sample of 182 women, and just to kind of see what we're looking like as an agency, not even in the neurofeedback population, but as agency-wide. What we found was pretty stark. 75% reported a brain injury incident of some kind, so they got at least one yes on the H section. Out of those, you had a very high incidence of being hit in the head, a high incidence of strangulation, being pushed down, even being shaken. And the really kind of frightening one is 91% of those who reported a brain injury incident reported having various major problems after the incident. So these are the kind of this population we're working with. It's pretty severe, but it's not surprising having gotten in and worked with these clients and these participants. So in our program, this is the equipment we use and use. So for QEEGs, we use the MITSAR 201M amplifier. We just use the standard electro caps. We have three sizes, 4 caps. We just have a small, 2 mediums, and a large. We assess with the NeuroGuide database. We in this setting, and I think in any big agency setting, I've always been a big believer in keeping it very simple. Because if you get, first off, if you get too complicated, it gets too expensive, and then the funding's not there. But if you get too complicated, the training becomes difficult. So we use very simple equipment. We use the BrainMaster Atlantis 2 2x2. We only do 1 and 2 channel surface training. That's all we do. We don't get anything any more complicated than that. And then we just use a basic ThinkPad laptop for all of our both QEEG collection and for our neurofeedback training. So I know a lot of you, I assume most of you do neurofeedback, and so you may have different processes than we do, and that's what I've learned over the years. And so our process looks kind of like this. We start with an intake, and it usually takes, it says about 2 hours, but once we get everyone fully trained, the clinicians, they can usually cut it down to about 1.5 hours. But we do the battery of written assessments. We do our videotaped intake interview, and then we do our quantitative EEG. We do, again, trying to keep it as simple as possible because of the magnitude or the number of people and the time constraints that we have within the agency. We do eyes open and eyes closed recordings, and then we look at database comparisons based on that. So once we finish the QEG, we sit down with them. We have a results meeting. We talk to them about the training plan, and then we'll begin our first session. Now, in our program, we try to encourage them to come at least 2 sessions per week. If they're in the shelter or they can do more, particularly if in the shelter and they're not working, always because they're living here on site, I always encourage them to come every day. But if you've done programs with neurofeedback before, and particularly in tough populations, you kind of take what you can get. You know, I typically will try to sway people away from coming once a week. You know, I want them coming more than that, but sometimes we have to because schedules are such that we have to do it a couple times a day, you know, spaced out, things like that. So again, you just kind of take what you can get. We're averaging about 35 to 45 sessions per client. We show a variety of feedback, mainly shows. What I've done is I've compiled a bunch of TV shows. So I've got a bunch of episodes of I Love Lucy. I've got multiple episodes of Faulty Towers and Jetsons and other cartoons and things. So that's mainly what they watch. And typically we'll do some modulating of contrast, but typically it's starting and stopping rather than the fading in and out is what the feedback that they get. And occasionally we'll do games. And then at the end, same as the intake, we do the assessments again. We have a different exit interview that we speak with them about, and then we do another quantitative EEG to compare. So let's explore, if we could, for a moment, some of our kind of average participants to get you an idea of what we're seeing in this population as far as the assessments are concerned. So our average participants is typically assessed with moderate to severe issues with day-to-day functioning. This is part of the HUDAS that breaks it out into different function categories. So some moderate to severe issues when understanding and communicating, getting along with people, participation in society. So if you have somebody with severe problems with participation in society, for instance, it's hard to get and keep a job. And that's what we see. So we see that pretty regularly. We also see moderate to severe issues with mental health functioning, really severe and close to severe issues with, on average, with depression, anxiety. You can read sleep is one that they may have had problems with sleep before, and then they come to our, particularly in our shelter. It's communal living, and so they're in a room with 3 other people, and so sleep just gets worse, and then that exacerbates a lot of these other issues as well. Personality functioning, repetitive thoughts and behaviors, we see severe issues with that. Severe post-traumatic stress symptoms, and we ask about substance use. I feel like, it's no surprise, I feel like substance use is chronically underreported in our population. I think it's for multiple reasons. One of which is they don't want to reply. First off, they don't really know me. Second off, they feel like there's a power differential with the agency just because of the position they're in, and they don't want to report using illegal substances for fear of being, say, for instance, being exited out of the shelter or not getting services, which is an unfounded fear, but that seems to permeate. But we have a wide range of substances that are used, as you can see there. So on intake, these are our most reported issues. We ask them what the issues they want to work on, what they're dealing with, and so you can see here, I mean, what you would think, anxiety, memory problems, depression, sleep issues, focus, confusion, and many times a client has all of those. It's a pretty average client to have multiples of those issues going on concurrently. So let's take a look real quick if we can, and I'm hoping the video works, so I hope y'all will let me know if it doesn't. But I want to talk about a case study just to give you an idea of what kind of results we see on an individual basis. So this person in particular was a 51-year-old female shelter resident. She came in complaining about depression, anxiety, lack of sleep, or too much sleep, but just her sleep patterns were not ideal. She had a history of head injury, domestic violence. Obviously, she also was shot in the head, which she, if you can hear the video in a moment, she talks about, which is pretty amazing. She tried medication. She tried traditional counseling. Not much change and not much progress made with those. And she was on, upon entering the program, she was on a hypertension medication and depression medication. So let me see if we can hear her. I'll play this video. This is her pre-interview before she started the neurofeedback upon intake. So let me get it started here. Let me see. There we go.
We can see movement, but I'm not hearing any soundtrack.
No sound? Okay. Let me see if I can see if
Josh, do you have a headset plugged in? Sometimes if you unplug that headset, then we can hear the.
Okay, perfect. Well, let me do that. Hang on. Let's see.
Nope, but he's unplugged his headset, so.
Yes,
Oh, there you go. We can't. If you were able to send us a copy of this, we can distribute it.
Okay, good.
To people, and then they'll be able to see the soundtrack. And I've seen these. These are great videos. They're worth watching because it really shows the before and after of these folks, as I recall.
That's right. So what the gist, and I will send a copy of this so that they can be seen. But what the gist of this is she's talking about how she really, and as you can kind of tell just by seeing the video and not hearing it, she was very delayed in her speech. Between, they'd ask her a question and she would take a while to sort of talk and think about it and process it. Very flat affect, very low voice, was not projecting very well. She talked about how she'd tried getting back on her medication and how she really, the only thing she had was to distract herself with games on her phone. She talked about how she was shot in the head 20 years ago in the back of the head, and it was lodged in the, I believe it was in the right front of her head. So a lot of major depression, sleep problems, things of that nature. So, but I'll send it on so everyone can see it. So what we did with her was we did about, I believe about 40 to 43 sessions worth of QEEG guided neurofeedback. And this is what we found. Pre-neurofeedback with the HUDAS, she was assessed as having 26% disability. Post-neurofeedback, 5%. So it's a really a large reduction in disability percentage. She had an 86% decrease in scores on the measure for depression, 50% decrease in the cross-cutting symptom measure, which looks at a wide range of various psychiatric symptoms. And she had a total remediation, 100% decrease in score in post-traumatic stress symptoms. So she made a really amazing progress through the neurofeedback. This is her database comparison, QEG. The top row here is your delta theta, alpha beta, high beta. That's her pre on the top. Her post is there at the bottom, and you can see pre. There's some pretty localized overactivity, and then some diffuse overactivity as well. And post, you can see almost a complete remediation of that activity, and those are the areas that we trained, and we had almost a complete remediation of that. So we were very pleased, obviously, to see that. And I know you can't see or hear the video here, but I'm going to start this just so you can kind of see her. So I'll pause it there, but I just wanted to give you just a couple of seconds of her. What we saw with her, the difference, is we saw somebody who, and you'll hear it if you get to see it when we send it out, but someone who went from very flat affect, very depressed, very slow in their processing, to someone who became much more quick-witted, and was smiling and making eye contact and was cracking jokes during the interview. And she talks about how, and if you work with people that are victims of domestic violence, this is a big deal. She talked about the only time her anxiety ever crept up as she was doing neurofeedback was the night before she had to go to court, and her abuser was going to be there. And so, of course, the anxiety, she said, the anxiety spike. I said, well, how did that go? And she said, well, I got there and I just didn't make eye contact with him. I didn't look at him because I knew he'd try to mouth something to me, and I was okay. And that's huge for the population we work with here. For her to be able to stand up to someone who has been in control and abusive for that long. So I was very pleased to hear that, and that was a huge success story. So let's talk about a second case study. I think we have some time still. This one, I won't put the videos in. We'll just kind of talk about what we saw. I've got videos for this person too, but I took them out just for time constraints. This particular participant was a 41-year-old female. She was one of our long-term housing residents, which again is a major mental health diagnosis, more kind of disabling conditions. She presented with depression, anxiety. She had been diagnosed bipolar, and anger. And I bold anger on purpose here, because when I say anger, I mean anger. It's not just that she would get a little frustrated about things. She got so angry about things that she would actually have to have a case manager go with her in public, so to the store, for instance. And she talks about that in her video, that she'd have to have somebody at the store because she just wanted to run everybody over. She couldn't handle it. And the case manager had to stand by her side and go, it's okay, we can make it through, we can do this, it'll be okay. So very angry. She had a history of a car accident, which again correlates to what we see in the research a little bit in high levels of car accident, brain injuries, and then domestic violence. She tried psychiatric services medication. She tried traditional counseling. She'd taken an anger management course, gotten a little bit out of the anger management course, but still had a lot of issues. She was on a huge cocktail of medications when she started the neurofeedback, as you can see here, and she just wasn't happy with being on all the medication. She wasn't happy with how she felt, wasn't happy with how angry she was, just generally not happy. So when we did the pre-assessments, what we found with the World Health Organization Disability Assessment Schedule was she was assessed as having a mild general disability. And as I mentioned before, the HUDAS kind of breaks it out into different sections. And her most severe, and it was very severe, it was as severe as you can get, was participation in society. Hence the not being able to go to the store and be in society. So she had a lot of trouble just in general, getting out and participating. Her cross-cutting symptom measure scores, it looks at different psychiatric symptoms. Those that were rated severe were depression, anger, anxiety, sleep, somatic symptoms. You can see all that here, just a wide range. She was assessed as severe for depression most of the time, was assessed most of the time for having anxiety, extreme post-traumatic stress, and she had no current illicit substance use. She had been one who probably 10 years before she started neurofeedback had cleaned up and was sober from methamphetamine, but previous to that 10 years, she was a pretty heavy meth user. So again, you would think carryover in the brain. So with her, we did, again, roughly about 40 sessions or so of neurofeedback, Q-guided neurofeedback, and here's what we found. So she had mild general disability, participation in society was off the charts. After neurofeedback, no severe disability concerns, and getting around, which has to do with mobility more than anything else, but just mobility, walking, sitting, that kind of thing. That was her most severe area, but that wasn't that severe. And so she had a great result there. Went from all of that laundry list of cross-cutting symptom measures, severe symptoms, to just sleep. She still was having trouble with sleep. We still have a little more work to do with her, or we could. Her depression went from severe to mild, anxiety most of the time to never, post-traumatic stress extreme to a little bit, and then again, no current illicit substance use. So again, a really successful kind of case study. And we see that, as you all know, I mean, I don't have to convince you of neurofeedback. You all know the powers of neurofeedback and what it can do, but it's just fun to see it in this population with this severe of a population. So let's look at her database comparison. You can see the top is the pre, the post is the bottom. So again, we had a really wide-ranging deficits all over the place, and you can see it pretty well remediated almost completely in the post. So again, very happy with that result as well. So let's talk about our overall. So of all the completers that we've had, or in that group, what are we seeing? So these are the average changes in each assessment. So we're seeing an average change of a reduction, average reduction of 25%. In the World Health Organization Disability Assessment Schedule, which is a pretty great drop down in disability. We're seeing 45% average reductions in score on the cross-cutting symptom measure, 58% reductions in depression, 49% in anxiety, and 57% in post-traumatic stress symptoms. We do see some reductions overall in substance use. We track that as well, pre and post. The reason I don't put those numbers up there is it's not reliable. We don't have a lot of people who admit to substance use, so we don't have a huge N with that. So I usually don't try to confuse things with that. But those who have reported, we've gotten pretty good, substantial reductions in substance use and illicit substance use. So this is kind of just to give you an idea of where we're training. I've broken out, really the central and frontal should be together, so 58%, but I always want to break it out just to kind of give you an idea. Central, when I mean central, I mean CZ, C3, C4. Frontal, obviously, is the rest, but roughly 58% of the time we're in the frontal lobe into the motor strip, which makes sense given the symptoms that we see. With people we see a lot of impulsivity, we see a lot of anger, poor executive planning, poor focus, those sorts of things. So it makes sense that we would be frontal, and given the extent of the injuries with car accidents or being hit in the face or on the head, we know that's pretty common. Parietal, temporal, occipital, we train everywhere, but these are the vast majority comes in the frontal central. So this chart may be a little confusing, but I want to put this in here just to kind of give you an idea. This is our percentage of enhancement or inhibition of frequencies. So if you just look at the delta theta, the blue and the red line there at delta theta, the bar there, what you'll see is that about 20% of the time, roughly, we enhance theta, and it's really mainly theta. About 80% of the time, we're inhibiting delta and theta in any of our training plans. It's conversely, it's pretty much the opposite at alpha. 80% of the time, we're enhancing alpha in this population. Beta, about 75% of the time we're enhancing, and then high beta, we typically don't. I've never really trained up high beta, and so I stay away from that. So if I see enhancements, or if I see too much high beta, we'll inhibit. So 100% of the time we're inhibiting high beta. But that just gives you an idea of kind of what we're doing on average with our clients. So I love this screen. We also keep track of not only quantitative data, but we also keep track of qualitative data. Now we have the videotapes, but we also, from session to session, we have our clinicians who will talk with our clients. How you doing? Ask for progress, and a lot of times clients just report this to us without us asking. But these are some great quotes from clients who've been through the program, either have finished or are currently in the program. Things like, I'm not crying uncontrollably anymore. My favorite is the one on the bottom. It says, I used to curse like a sailor to anyone that irritated me about the littlest things. Now I walk away and I'm a lot calmer, which is new to me. It feels good to recognize that I'm reacting differently to things that used to piss me the hell off. So, we deal with a lot of anger, and you can see if, this client in particular, if it's a little thing that pissed them off and they went off the handle. How do you keep a job? I mean, you really don't. And this person couldn't. They would fly off the handle at the job and be fired. So the fact that they could recognize that, and that's frontal lobe stuff. You know, we're kicking it into gear. And we're thinking about consequences, and we're thinking about better ways of doing things. So I'm excited about that. So I want to talk briefly, and I think we have some time to do it, but I want to talk about program considerations. So things that we learned, because again, I think we're one of, if not one of the only program for this population that does this on this large of a scale. So we had to kind of hit road bumps and figure out things along the way. So I just want to kind of share some of the major ones with you if you're ever considering building up a program. Funding is the first one. It's really an important one. It takes a long time. As you know, there's a steep learning curve for neurofeedback for clinicians who get into it, for clients who are doing it. So much less having to convince funding agencies who aren't on the ground, don't see it, don't know what it is. Hey, we're going to hook sensors up to people's heads. There's a lot of education that has to go in to writing up, knowing how to concisely write up reports and things so that comes across. Space is huge. If you work in a nonprofit agency like I do, all nonprofit agencies I've ever seen, almost to a one, it struggles with space. And so we started out with sort of fixed locations for our neurofeedback, where we'd have a computer and a monitor and everything. That's what we did, or the laptop, and that's what we do. And it was fixed. But the problem is that we share offices a lot, and so our fixed sort of neurofeedback was in the counselor's office. So if we're doing neurofeedback, she can't do talk therapy, and if she's doing talk therapy, we can't do neurofeedback. Now we combine them a lot of times, but there are clients who don't want to do neurofeedback; they just want to do talk therapy. So being able to, we couldn't just uproot every time and move. So what I did is I bought some carts that are audiovisual carts that have wheels, and because we're a laptop and we're the Atlantis 2x2, you just literally go plug it in and unplug it and roll it to another office, and you have your mobile unit there. Multiple locations are always interesting. If anybody who has had multiple clinics, I have had in the past, and then we have 3 clinics here, just making sure I can't be at 3 places at once. So making sure each of the staff at each location know what they're doing, that they can not just properly deal with the clients in the sessions, but understand if something goes wrong technologically, if whether it's the computer or the amplifier or the software, whatever. So that goes into to really this next point, which is staff awareness and education. I did a lot of this in the beginning of the program, because this is a fairly large agency, and it's got different departments and different people who aren't connected to neurofeedback. Well, those different people and staff deal with the clients, my clients in my program, on a daily basis, particularly the case managers. So they're going to be the ones, instead of me going individually to every single client trying to recruit, I did a big campaign on staff awareness and education so that the staff here could sell and recruit for me, rather than me having to do it to everybody. And that's been great, because when the staff is interested in it and they know how to explain it, at least a basic level, enough to get the client interested in it, then those start funneling into our program and we can help more people. So I did a big series of, and I still do, staff awareness sort of trainings. Then of course, client awareness, we're dealing with people who have had trauma, brain injury, mental illness. So trying to convince them and not convince them, but to let them know that us putting wires on their head isn't a bad thing. I could tell you a lot of stories about that, and I could do it another time. But so I did a big client awareness and education campaign. Client compliance is a big deal. We have a transient population. So our population in our shelter comes in and they have a 90-day stay. And they can get extended for extenuating circumstances, but typically it's emergency shelter, so 90 days. Well, then they move on, and we may help them find housing. They may find their own housing, and we may not have all that much contact with them again. Their housing may be up in the city of Houston, 30, 40, 50 miles away. So being able to get them back down here to our facility is very difficult. And so what we run into is we can do 30, 40 sessions and be right at the end with somebody, and then they get an apartment and they're out and we can't get them back. And so that's been a very frustrating thing. So we're working on some things right now. We've got a grant in process. It's a very large grant. Part of it is to hire on what we're kind of calling mobile clinicians that will actually take equipment and go to people's homes to finish up their apartments, whatever, to finish up the neurofeedback. And we're hoping that will help. Motivation is a big deal. These clients, again, they have competing interests, particularly from the shelter. It's like, okay, I got to get a job. I got to find a place to live. I've just been abused. I'm in a communal shelter. So we're competing, our program's competing with all these other things that they have to get done. If they have kids, that adds another wrench into it. So we've started an issue or a program called a Bucks program. It's just a token economy in our shelter and at our housing program where we reward ladies with essentially bucks, fake money, and they can earn that and for doing various things. And then once a week we open up a store with donated items that are generally like small appliances, things that you could use to excuse me, outfit an apartment, and they buy those with their bucks money. And we talked about paranoia and trust as well. Staff retention is a big one. Like any nonprofit, there's turnover in staff. It just happens. And as you know, with the steep learning curve with neurofeedback, trying to keep staff, once you train them, keeping them on. Thankfully, we haven't had a huge amount of staff turnover in the neurofeedback program, but we've had a clinician who we trained up and then they moved on. I don't blame them for moving on. They had a great opportunity, but then you've got to start all the way over again. And then, of course, other agency demands. We're not in a vacuum. The agency has a lot of other programs they do. So if you're in an agency, you're trying to start a neurofeedback program, there's a lot of politicking that has to go on. And I hate that word politicking, but there's a lot of just, you have to push, your program. You have to be very concise about what you offer. What I did was I kind of put it on, not so much like, hey, I mean, obviously it's going to help the clients, but also tried to kind of go in the direction of how's it help the staff? How is it going to help the agency? How is it going to free up staff time to do other things and to provide more services? So things like that, and being very concise with that is important because we are competing with other programs that are funded. So I'll leave you with this. This is these are some of our ladies that have finished, and they're before and after pictures. Before is on the left and after is on the right, and you can see before a lot of downward-looking faces, no eye contact, lots of frowns. After you see lots of smiles, you see different hair. One of the interesting things is, and I've worked in neurofeedback for many, many years, so I've seen this on an individual basis with clients, but it's amazing to see it so widespread in an agency like this, is that we see changes in, people losing weight, they're changing their hair, they're putting makeup on, all those things, better clothes, those kind of things. So, but I just wanted to kind of show you this. It's pretty cool to see the before and after, and we have many more than this. But that's it for me. I appreciate the time. If we have time, we can do questions now. There's my email address there. That's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. Feel free to email and I'll get you any information you need. But thank you very much.
All right. Hey, well, thanks, Josh. Now, questions, anybody? We've got a few minutes left. Any particular questions? I'm going to ask you one while we're waiting to see if somebody else, they have to unmute themselves and it may take a minute. I'm actually going to be giving a presentation to APSAC, the Association for the Prevention of Child Sexual Abuse, this summer, specifically about head injury and specifically about head injury in children from face slapping. And I'm just curious, given the folks that you've seen, and maybe I missed the data somewhere, but how many of these women were punched or slapped in the face repeatedly, causing that head injury?
So we see it's a pretty high incidence, with the help screen. That's one of the questions that's asked is, have you been hit in the head?
Right.
And there's data on back of the head versus facial sort of things. So I can get you this. I can pass that data along to you if you'd like. But,
I'd love to see it because I think what I would imagine, and maybe you have some insight into this, if you have a domestic violence situation where a father who's abusing the mother is also physically abusing the children. If he's one to slap her in the face, he probably slaps the kids in the head or in the face.
Yeah, you that would be, we see it both ways. So sometimes we see that where the kids are physically abused. Other times we have women who come and they flee with their children in the shelter, and the dads never touch the kids. Mm-hmm. Never once laid a hand on them. He beats up mom all day, every day, never touches the kids. But you still have the trauma, right? The kid knows they're in it. Right. So with the kids, we don't work much with kids. Now we are starting to, with our next grant, hopefully that's coming out in September, we want to open up the neurofeedback to the kids here too. That'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, well, if I find anything out, I'll let you know. That'll be this summer in the end of June, so you and I'll stay in touch.
Yeah, please do. We've got, last year I was able to present to ISNR, but the earlier in that week, we presented this to the National Center for Victims of Crime in Philadelphia. And then we've got in May, we're presenting at the Conference for Crimes Against Women, which is a conference that's got about 1,800 conference goers, and it's mainly law enforcement and that sort of thing. So I'm hoping that's exciting that you're able to the kids and talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Other questions folks may have?
Great.
I do have one question.
Yes.
Hi. So I was wondering, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So is any part of this presentation available to the public? Especially
I can.
The videos or your presentation. You can?
I can. Sure. I'll send the presentation on. The videos themselves, I'm a little bit, I know I said I'd send them on, but now I think I'm a little bit more leery about sending the videos on since they're clients. And there's no identifying information. But I, before I send the videos, I just want to get the okay from the agency. But I'll be glad to send the presentation itself.
Yeah. If he once whatever Josh can send, he'll send to me. I will post it on the listserv and announce it.
Okay, great.
So is it okay for us to share this information with others?
Oh, certainly, absolutely. Yeah, please do. I'll send I can definitely send the PowerPoint, the presentation with the data, and I've got more data. I have spreadsheets and spreadsheets of data that I keep. We're looking to publish as well, and we're working with a couple of folks to do that. But yeah, please do. You can.
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Josh, this is Martin. I have a question too. Are you interested in cooperating with other people working in a similar field? I'm in Vancouver.
Absolutely. I don't know of anybody else in this field that's quite has a program, but I would love to. I mean, I think our goal is to try to. We've coordinated so far on sort of a state level with the Texas Commission on Family Violence, and I'd love to anywhere we can kind of push this and get this in with this population. I'd love to.
What is a good time to get in touch with you?
Send me an email. I think my screen's still up. If you'll send me an email, we connect, and I would love to talk with you.
Okay.
Otherwise, great. Martin, if you can't get a hold of them, let me know. Email me, and I'll hook you up with them via email or whatever.
That will be great. I think I can contribute there.
Wonderful.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Well, hey, Josh, thank you so much. Interesting material. Even hearing it the second time, I find it interesting. And I started working with abused and violent kids, and know that in these families there's lots of domestic violence, and I appreciate the work that you do in helping these women and these families, and hopefully it'll catch on in more agencies. It's usually slow to go when it comes to agencies, as you found out with all the funding issues that go along with it, as you very clearly mentioned. But wishing you the best of luck. I'll be in touch, and thank you so much.
Thank you all very much.
Everybody. Yep. Everybody, we'll see you Friday at 12 noon. Have a great afternoon, everyone.